So you and I, we're about to go on a little adventure together. That adventure is going to span 118 years of Tudors, and it's going to be one generation at a time. How does that sound to you? I'll be your host this evening. My name is Christina. Thank you for joining us here at my Tudor Era Tapestry. In the sultry late summer of 1492, Queen Eliza rested in her richly appointed chambers at Westminster Palace. The air hung heavy with the scent of beeswax candles, their golden flicker casting intricate shadows across the tapestries of mythic beasts and blooming vines that adorned the stone walls. The faint perfume of roses drifted upward from the palace gardens, mingling with the musk of polished oak and the crisp linen of her bed. At 26, Eliza's golden hair, loosely braided beneath a linen coif, framed a face that bore the serene beauty of her Yorkist lineage. On September 7, she gave birth to her fourth child, a daughter named Elizabeth in honor of her late mother, Elizabeth Woodville, a delicate infant whose arrival sent ripples of celebration through the Tudor court. Westminster buzzed with the energy of a dynasty cementing its claim. King Henry, Eliza's husband, marked the birth with lavish feasts in the Great Hall, where minstrels played and courtiers toasted the new princess. Bells rang out across London, their joyous clamor echoing from St. Paul's to the distant villages along the Thames. Yet within the Queen's chambers, a quieter scene unfolded. Eliza, clad in a loose gown of soft green damask to ease her discomfort of recovery, sat propped against a mound of embroidered pillows, her gaze fixed on the cradle beside her bed. The cradle, carved from oak and draped with crimson velvet, fringed in gold, held little Elizabeth, swaddled in cloth of gold that shimmered faintly in the candlelight. The babe was small, her cheeks pale, but touched with a faint flush, her tiny fingers curling like rose petals. Eliza's heart swelled with a fierce, tender love, yet a thread of concern wove through her joy. Little Elizabeth's cries were faint, her breathing uneven, stirring a mother's instinct honed by the trails of a turbulent childhood. The Wars of the Roses, that brutal contest for England's crown, had left deep scars on Eliza's soul. Her father, King Edward, had died when she was 17, plunging her family into chaos. Her brothers, Edward and Richard, the princes in the Tower, had vanished, their fates shrouded in whispers of murder that haunted her still. Those losses had taught her the fragility of life, even in royal cradles. And now, as she watched her daughter's chest rise and fall, she whispered a prayer to the Virgin Mary. Her fingers brushed a silvery rosary, its beads cool against her skin, each one a plea for the health and strength of her child, in a court where every heir was a shield against rebellion. The christening was a spectacle of Tudor triumph. The chapel's vaulted ceiling, painted with stars, gleamed under the light of 100 candles. The font, draped in cloth of silver and ready to receive the princess, who was carried by her godmother and grandmother, Lady Margaret Beaufort, Henry's very serious mother. Courtiers in silks and velvets filled the pew, their murmurs hushed as the Archbishop of Canterbury anointed the infant with holy oil. Little Elizabeth, wrapped in a mantle of ermine, stirred faintly, her cry swallowed by the swell of a choir. The ceremony was a declaration of dynastic strength, the Tudor rose emblazoned on banners and the court's collective imagination. Eliza's chambers became a hub of quiet activity as she received visitors. Ladies of the court, their gowns rustling, presented gifts of embroidered linens and silver rattles for the princess. Diplomats, their voices low, brought news of a Genoese sailor, Christopher Columbus, whose voyage under Spain's flag stirred talk of new worlds across the sea. Eliza listened graciously, her hands folded in her lap, but her mind remained with her daughter. The nursery, a warm, firelit chamber overseen by a trusted wet nurse and guided by local attendants, became her sanctuary, where she spent hours, her fingers tracing the soft, downy hair on little Elizabeth's head, willing her to grow strong. She ordered a reliquary of St. Margaret, patron saint of childbirth placed near the cradle, its gold casing glinting in the firelight, a talisman against the specter of loss that loomed in her memory. Her own mother had lost children, and Eliza had seen too many royal infants fade, despite prayers and physicians. Her elder children brought moments of lightness to her vigil. Meg, 3, and Harry, just a year old, were brought by their nurses. Yet it was little Elizabeth's quiet presence that anchored her, a reminder of the dynasty's hopes resting in a fragile frame. The court's joy was tempered for Eliza by the memory of her own losses and the whispers of those who still viewed Henry's crown as contested. Her friendship with her cousin Maggie Pole offered solace against the intrigues. Maggie shared Eliza's Yorkist roots and understood the weight of their shared history. On a quiet afternoon, as rain pattered against the leaded windows, Maggie sat with Eliza in the nursery, her nimble fingers embroidering a tiny cap for the princess. Eliza clung to that hope, her lips curving in a faint smile. Maggie's presence was a refuge, her loyalty a reminder that not all of Eliza's family were lost to war or suspicion. In the golden haze of summer 1492, Margaret Beaufort, Countess of Richmond and Derby, stood in the sunlit halls of Westminster Palace, her dark eyes alight with a quiet triumph, tempered by the ceaseless vigilance of a woman who had forged a dynasty through decades of strife. At 49, her slight frame, draped in a gown of deep burgundy velvet edged with gold thread, carried the unyielding authority of a king's mother. The Tudor court, fragrant with the scent of roses drifting from the gardens below and alive with the hum of celebration, rejoiced at the birth of a new princess, Elizabeth, born on September 7 to Margaret's daughter-in-law, Queen Eliza, and her son, King Henry. Westminster Palace pulsed with purpose. The great hall, its high ceilings echoing with the clink of goblets and the murmurs of courtiers, was hung with tapestries depicting heraldic beasts, lions, dragons, and the Tudor rose itself, woven in threads of crimson and gold. Preparations for the christening consumed the court, and Margaret, ever the strategist, oversaw every detail with the precision of a general. The silver font, polished to a mere sheen, stood ready in the chapel royale, flanked by candelabra blazing with beeswax tapers. Yet as Margaret stood among the velvet-clad nobles, her sharp gaze fixed on the babe swaddled in cloth of gold, her tiny form a beacon of dynastic hope. Her heart wrestled with a grandmother's pride and a strategist's caution. Little Elizabeth's arrival strengthened the Tudor claim, but the infant's fragility stirred memories of Margaret's own perilous childbirth at 13, when she, a widow, still a child herself, had borne King Henry, her only son, in the cold stone halls of Pembroke Castle. The pain of that labor, the fear that she and her infant might not survive, lingered like a shadow. Now, in her private chamber, where fire crackled against the evening chill, Margaret knelt before a small oak altar, its surface adorned with a reliquary of St. Anne, patroness of mothers. Margaret's days were a tapestry of devotion and duty, her life a delicate balance between the spiritual and the political. By day, she conferred with Henry's advisers in the council chamber, her voice calm but commanding, as she ensured the christening splendor would resonate beyond England's shores. She reviewed lists of guests, knowing each noble's presence was a pledge of loyalty, or at least a calculated deference to the Tudor crown. Yet her thoughts quickly turned to the nursery, where Elizabeth's survival was paramount. She ordered a reliquary of St. Anne placed near the child's cradle, and ensured the wet nurse, a sturdy woman from Kent, was diligent with her duties. Margaret's own maternal instincts, sharpened by years of safeguarding Henry, guided her oversight, her presence a quiet command to the nursery's attendants. The christening day arrived, a triumph of Tudor spectacle. In the chapel royale, under a ceiling painted with stars, Margaret stood as godmother, holding her granddaughter, little Elizabeth, as the Archbishop of Canterbury anointed her with holy oil. The infant stirred faintly, her cry lost in the swell of the choir's Te Deum, and Margaret's heart lifted, though her eyes scanned the gathered nobles for any hint of disloyalty. The banquet that followed filled the great hall with laughter and music, but Margaret remained watchful, her mind already turning to the next steps, securing Arthur's betrothal, strengthening ties with Spain, guarding against the shadows of rebellion. As September's light faded, Margaret often stood at a window overlooking the Thames, its water glinting under a sky streaked with gold. The late summer of 1492 was, for her, a season of quiet victory and ceaseless vigilance. The birth of her granddaughter, a light in the Tudor tapestry she wove with relentless care. Her prayers and plans were a shield, her resolve a steady flame burning for a dynasty poised between triumph and the ever-present thorns of a contested crown. In the nursery, as she watched little Elizabeth sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling, Margaret whispered a vow to herself. This child, this rose, would endure, and the Tudor name would stand, unyielding, against the tides of time. In the mellow autumn of 1492, Maggie Pole stood in the quiet halls of the Bisham Manor, her husband's modest Berkshire estate. At 19, her hair caught the slanting light of September's sun, filtering through the manor's leaded windows, casting delicate patterns across the polished oak floor. She cradled her newborn son, Henry Pole, his tiny form wrapped in fine linen, embroidered with the Pole crest, a falcon rising against a field of stars. The manor, its stone walls draped in ivy and warmed by the scent of wood smoke from the great hearth, was a haven from the bustling Tudor court at Westminster, where the birth of Princess Elizabeth to King Henry and Maggie's cousin Eliza had set the palace alight with celebration. Yet for Maggie, a Plantagenet by blood, the season was one of personal triumph, shadowed by the ever-present weight of her Yorkist heritage, in a court wary of her lineage's latent claim to the throne. Maggie moved gently through the nursery, her steps careful, but her spirit buoyed by young Henry's sturdy cries, a stark contrast to the frail whimpers of the new princess she had seen at court. A cradle of dark walnut carved with simple vines stood near the window, overlooking the manor's orchards, where the apples hung heavy, their red and gold skins mirroring the autumn leaves drifting across the lawn. Maggie's marriage to Sir Richard Pole, a loyal Lancastrian 11 years her senior, had been arranged the previous year by King Henry. Richard was kind, but reserved, with the soldier's bearing and a face weathered by years of service. He stood by her side, his pride quiet as he watched their son, named Henry as a nod to the king, a subtle pledge to secure their place in a court that viewed Maggie's lineage with suspicion. The labor had been arduous, lasting through a long September night, the midwife's murmurs blending with Maggie's whispered prayers to the Virgin, her hands clutching a small wooden cross that had once belonged to her mother, Isabel Neville, now holding her son, his small fist curled against her chest. She felt a fierce resolve to shield him from the perils of her family's name. Her father, George, Duke of Clarence, had been executed for treason in 1478, and her brother, Edward, Earl of Warwick, imprisoned in the Tower of London since 1485, his youth no shield against his Yorkist claim. The Tudor court's joy over Princess Elizabeth's birth, celebrated with a grand christening Maggie had attended, was a stark contrast to her private fears. She had journeyed to Westminster, her deep blue velvet gown shimmering under the Chapel Royale's torchlight, her fair hair tucked beneath a gabled hood adorned with a single pearl. Standing among the nobles, she had smiled as she briefly held the swaddled princess. The chapel, its vaulted ceiling painted with stars, had glowed with the light of 100 candles. Little Elizabeth, frail and wrapped in ermine, had stirred faintly as she was anointed, and Maggie's heart had ached for her cousin, whose worry for the babe's health mirrored her own for her son. Their shared history, the loss of their fathers, the mystery of Eliza's brothers, the captivity of Maggie's brother, bonded them in shared sorrow. Maggie felt the court's eyes upon her, her Plantagenet lineage a silent threat in Henry's fragile dynasty, still scarred from the Wars of the Roses. At a banquet following the christening held at Westminster's Great Hall, Maggie had sat among the lesser nobles, her place carefully chosen to signal her diminished status, yet proximity to the throne. The hall buzzed with talk. the clink of silver goblets mingling with laughter and the strains of lutes over dishes of roasted peacock and tarts, the overheard whispers of distant lands and Christopher Columbus's voyage, the news brought by a Castilian envoy in a doublet of slashed silk, sparking her imagination, and for a moment she dreamed of a place far from the court's intrigues, where her son could grow free of the shadow of her blood. But duty anchored her to England. Each night Maggie knelt in her small chapel, a stone chamber tucked at the manor's heart, its single stained-glass window casting crimson and blue light across the flagstones. The glow of a single candle illuminated her rosary, its beads of jet and silver worn smooth by her prayers for Edward's freedom and her son's protection. She prayed for Henry, that he might grow strong in a world where their blood was both a crown and a curse, and for Eliza's daughter, whose fragility echoed the precariousness of the Tudor throne. Her letters to Eliza, carried by trusted messengers, were a lifeline of shared motherhood. In one, written by candlelight as the manor slept, Maggie confessed her dreams for her son. Eliza's replies, warm and laced with her own hopes for Princess Elizabeth, were a comfort, their bond a refuge from the court's watchful gaze. One evening, as twilight deepened and the manor grew still, Henry, asleep in her arms as the fire's glow danced across his face, his lashes casting shadows on his cheeks. Outside, an owl called, its mournful note blending with the rustle of leaves. She traced her son's tiny hands, her thoughts drifting to Edward, alone in the tower, and to Eliza, guarding her own fragile princess. In the waning light of late autumn 1492, Princess Meg was a spirited 3-year-old flitting through the halls of Eltham Palace, her auburn curls bouncing beneath a simple velvet cap. The Tudor court still basking in the glow of her sister Elizabeth's birth. Eltham, with its green lawns and timbered galleries, was a favored retreat, its air tinged with the scent of wood smoke and late-blooming roses. Meg, clad in a kirtle of soft blue wool, embroidered with silver threads, darted between the palace's tapestries and chambers. Her laughter a bright note amidst the murmur of courtiers and the clink of goblets at evening feasts. Yet even at her tender age, she sensed the weight of her royal blood, her place as the eldest daughter of a new dynasty shaping her world. The court celebration of Princess Elizabeth's christening lingered in Meg's memory, the chapel royale aglow with candlelight as she peeked from behind her mother's skirts, watching the infant swaddled in cloth of gold. Meg adored her mother, whose Yorkist beauty softened the court's edges, but she also felt the quiet tension in her father's gaze, his vigilance a reminder of the kingdom's fragile peace. The Wars of the Roses, though fading into history, cast long shadows. Meg overheard whispers of her missing uncles, the princes in the Tower, and the name Perkin Warbeck, a distant threat her father's advisers discussed in hushed tones. These fragments, caught during stolen moments by tapestries, stirred her childish curiosity, though their full import eluded her. Under the tutelage of her governess, Lady Margaret Bryan, she practiced her letters, her quill scratching unevenly across parchment as she formed Latin prayers and simple French phrases. Her mother's hope that she might one day wed in a foreign court, echoing in her lessons. In the garden, she chased her brother Arthur, the heir, at 6, their games of tag weaving through hedgerows, his teasing laughter mingling with her own. Yet Meg's heart often turned to the nursery, where little Elizabeth's frail cries tugged at her. She slipped in one November afternoon, her small hands clutching a posy of dried lavender for the cradle, hoping to cheer her sister. Queen Eliza adjusted the babe's swaddling. Her mother's smile was tender, but Meg caught the flicker of worry, a mother's fear for a delicate child. Her father Henry, stern but kind, sometimes joined her in the great hall, his rare smile softening when she curtsied with exaggerated grace. Margaret Beaufort, her formidable grandmother, was a constant presence, her black velvet gowns and sharp gaze a reminder of the Tudor resolve. At night, Meg knelt in the palace chapel, the scent of incense heavy as she mimicked her mother's prayers, her small voice asking for Elizabeth's strength and her family's safety. The late autumn of 1492 was a season of innocence, tinged with the first stirrings of awareness. Eltham's warmth a cocoon for her childhood, as she stood by a window, the frost tracing patterns on the glass. Her dreams wove tales of adventure and duty, her place as a Tudor princess a delicate thread in a tapestry still being spun. Her heart bound to her family in a kingdom poised between triumph and uncertainty. In the vibrant spring of 1493, the Alhambra Palace in Granada hummed with the energy of a triumphant Spain. Its courtyards fragrant with blooming jasmine and the distant ring of bells celebrating the final victory of the Reconquista. Catherine of Aragon, now 7 years old, her auburn hair cascading in loose curls beneath a delicate lace veil, moved through the palace with a child's grace, her small frame clad in a crimson gown embroidered with golden pomegranates. The Alhambra, with its filtered arches and shimmering fountains, was her playground and her school, a place where the weight of her royal destiny began to take shape amidst the echoes of the newly unified kingdom of Spain. Catherine's days were a balance of innocence and instruction under the watchful eye of her governess. She practiced her letters, her quill scratching haltingly across parchment as she formed Latin prayers and Spanish verses. Her mother, Isabella, a figure of unyielding faith and regal poise, often joined her in the court of myrtles, where the queen's green velvet gown swept the tiles as she reviewed dispatches from across the realm. On one sun-drenched morning, Isabella knelt beside Catherine, her hands guiding her daughters over a map of Spain, pointing to the seas beyond. The court buzzed with news that spring, for Christopher Columbus, the Genoese mariner whose westward voyage had consumed the palace's attention in 1492, had returned in March, laden with tales of islands across the ocean. Catherine overheard the excitement in the hall of the ambassadors, where Columbus knelt before her parents, his weathered hands presenting strange treasures, parrots with feathers like living jewels, gold trinkets, and tails. To Catherine he was a hero from the romances her nurse spun, his salt-streaked cloak a banner of adventure. She imagined him sailing under a sky vast as God's promise, planting crosses on shores where no Catholic had stood. Yet the whispers of the court carried doubts as well. Some clerks muttered that Columbus' claims were exaggerated, his new lands mere specks across the endless sea. Catherine, listening from behind a carved screen during a banquet, felt a pang of loyalty to the mariner's dream, her childish heart believing in his version of a world unbound. She wove him into her prayers each night, kneeling in the palace chapel where the candlelight danced on the Virgin's serene face, her small voice asking for his safety and for Spain's glory. The idea of far-off lands stirred her imagination, mingling with the growing awareness of her own betrothal to Arthur, Prince of Wales, a distant boy whose name was spoken with increasing frequency in the palace's diplomatic chambers. Her nurse, Beatrice, painted England as a land of emerald hills and stone castles, and Catherine, clutching her prayer book, pictured herself crossing seas like Columbus, carrying her faith to a foreign throne. Beyond her lessons and her dreams, Catherine's world was filled with the vibrancy of her siblings, who filled the Alhambra with laughter and sibling rivalry. But it was Isabella's presence that anchored her. The Queen's daily masses, a ritual Catherine joined, her small hands folded in devotion. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking Granada's Vega, the sunset gilding the Sierra Nevada, Catherine, her gaze fixed on the horizon, felt the stirrings of a purpose she could only dimly understand, her thoughts weaving Columbus's voyages, her mother's resolve, and her own future into a tapestry of hope. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com. Slide into my DMs on Facebook or Instagram at Long Live the Queen Podcast, or join the party on Patreon, where we have extended episodes and bonus content.